Welcome to Engaging Experts, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with influential attorneys. Our guests will describe their practice and expertise. Then we will go deep on various topics related to effectively using expert witnesses.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Engaging Experts. This is David Seeley, Business Development Executive with Roundtable Group and one of the hosts of this podcast series. We have a great guest for you today, Jonathan Schwartz. Jonathan's a partner at Goldberg Segalla and chair of the firm's cyber risk coverage practice. Jonathan received a Bachelor's of Arts degree from George Washington University, Elliott School of International Affairs, and his Juris Doctorate from the University of Illinois College of Law, graduating magna cum laude. Jonathan was the former chair of the 2019 Insurance Roundtable and currently serves as the vice chair of the Insurance Law Committee at the Defense Research Institute. In addition, Jonathan is a top-rated lawyer by Super Lawyers. He has the highest peer rating standard by Martindale Hubbell, AV preeminent, and he has been recognized as a best lawyer in America consecutively from 2018 to 2021. Jonathan, we are delighted to have you with us today. I'm looking forward to diving in. But first, let's pause briefly for this sponsorship message.
This episode is brought to you by Roundtable Group, the experts on experts. We've been connecting attorneys with experts for over 25 years. Find out more at roundtablegroup.com.
Welcome, Jonathan. Thank you for being our guest on this episode.
Oh, David, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with your listeners.
You are most welcome. And, Jonathan, I must admit, I've been so impressed reading your bio and learning about all of your accomplishments. It's been a true pleasure getting to know a little bit more about you and your background. And I'd like to kind of start right at the beginning, if you don't mind. At what age did you really want to become an attorney? When did you realize that was something that you were looking for? Was there anyone or anything that led to that decision?
I think I've wanted to be an attorney almost my entire life. I come from a family that is primarily comprised of doctors and lawyers, and I found out very quickly that medicine was not my true calling. So I think that left me with only one option. With that said, I really look to my aunt Esther, who is a lawyer. She is a very accomplished lawyer who actually happens to be in the same practice area that I am. And that is only, I think, by happenstance that I ended up in that practice area. But nonetheless, I always looked up to her, and I think that she inspired me to pursue the practice of law.
So can you tell us a little bit about the early days when you first started in your career? What was that like? And, how things changed for you throughout your career?
Well, David, I think that to better understand the early days of my career, it's important to understand where I came from. So when I was in law school, I found myself really attracted to the specialty of intellectual property. And I really concentrated in law school on making myself the best intellectual property law student I could be until I really found that it was not the best fit for me. So then I pulled back a little bit and decided to find an opportunity that would allow me to reset and find what my true calling was. And in doing so, I had found myself at the Illinois Appellate Court right out of law school as an appellate court clerk. And while there, I had experienced a whole number of different areas of the law, but really found that I was interested in appellate practice. So coming out of the Illinois Appellate Court, I found myself looking for a job in civil appeals, and I connected with a firm, which ended up being my first firm, and they allowed me to do civil appeals as part of my practice. But they also said, we don't quite have enough work for you to do appeals full-time. Would you mind also doing insurance coverage work? And I said, I'm not entirely sure what that is, but if you will pay me a salary, I will certainly do that for you. So that's what I did. And I found actually that while I really enjoyed appeals, I believe that insurance coverage is kind of a similar animal, but I think is one that I found even more exciting. So I quickly transitioned to the world of insurance coverage, and only through that and my involvement with the Defense Research Institute, or DRI, did I find myself where I sort of am today. So I started off in insurance coverage, and then moving from one firm to the next, and continuing to build my practice and find the right platform for me I eventually ended up at Goldberg Segalla, helping them to open up their Chicago office in 2014. How did this all change? How is practice today very different from when I started practice? I'm not entirely sure for me that it really is. Again, I found myself as my career went on, specializing more and more in the field of insurance coverage. But I would say the one big difference between when I first started and now is technology, and most importantly, I think the ability for people to work remotely. When I was first starting, we had laptops, we could bring them, to and fro. But I think it was the ubiquity of Wi-Fi, the ability to have smartphones that allow us to communicate effectively with our firms when we're not in the office. I think that's probably been the largest and most significant change that I can point to from when I started in practice.
Yeah, and I'm sure even with, the recent pandemic and things like the last year and a half, we've even gone even more to a more kind of remote setting and being able to work from home. And so very, very interesting. So when you look back as well on your career, do you have any kind of defining moments, that you look back on now and maybe you appreciate a little bit more now than you did? Maybe it was advice from a mentor or perhaps, life lessons you took from colleagues that you've worked with?
Every one of my moves throughout my career has provided a defining moment. But I think I look back most fondly on some of the mentorship, as you indicated, from some of the partners that I worked with over the years. The first one I would note is the person I worked for at my first firm, Jim Horstman. And Jim was always kind enough to impart very sage advice about the practice of law. And the one that always stuck with me most was that you are now a professional, and that means that you have to act like a professional all times. You're not. It's very hard to take off the lawyer hat, when you leave the office, because you remain a private practicing lawyer. So with that in mind, I think the soundbite that he always used was, it's time to be a professional. And then I would say, as I get to my next firm and the person I worked with most closely, and I consider one of my mentors, he always stressed the importance of reputation and building that reputation. So, I would say it's kind of similar to the real estate motto, which is location, location, location. I think in his words, it was always reputation, reputation, reputation. So that was something that I always took away from. That was one of the other very important life lessons. As I then transitioned into an in-house experience, I worked with another attorney who was one of the most brilliant people I've ever worked with, and his mentorship that he gave me was in the concept, and it's kind of a similar one to reputation, but precision. It's very important to be precise in everything that we do, and so he always was kind to lend a book or to provide some guidance about how to become a little bit better at what we do. And I think after my experience there, I always end up with certain legal resources at my fingertips. Even as I am working from home in this pandemic environment, I still bring home my copies of some of the legal texts that I find most important, including the ones from Brian Garner. And then I guess the next step I found myself in was at Goldberg Segalla, and the mentorship I've gotten from so many of my partners has been invaluable. But one of the ones I think sticks out the most is the importance of perspective and the big picture, and helping me to best understand how everything fits together. So it's something along those lines that I've always treasured as I've grown in my practice. And then the final one that I'll mention is actually not from one of my partners. When I was admitted to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts as a practicing lawyer midway through my career, I found out that one of the requirements for licensure was that you had to attend in person a new lawyer's seminar. So I found myself, I think about 12 plus years into my career, sitting in a big classroom with a lot of lawyers who had never been in practice at all. So a lot of fresh out of law school attorneys. And at the end of the day, they brought in a judge to talk to us about the legal profession, and it was a great talk. But what I took from it most was actually an opportunity to talk to him afterwards. And the judge, I had actually come off a situation where, in a case where we had gotten into some loggerheads with opposing counsel, and I probably could have handled the whole situation better. And I think, got a little crosswise with the judge in that case. So I talked to the judge about the situation, the Massachusetts judge, and we talked about, what could I possibly do to work through the situation. Again, I think there are opportunities in every crisis to learn from it and to make things better. So this judge was kind enough to encourage me to reach out to the judge who I had gotten crosswise with, and to not only apologize, but to talk to him a little bit about what I could do better and gain some mentorship from him. So I think that the lesson learned from that one is that judges, along with attorneys, are human. They've most likely been in a similar position that you have. So just because you get yourself in a hot spot doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity to learn from it. So remember that judges are human is a very important lesson that I learned.
Yeah, that all sounds like just you got some very good advice and adhered to it and kind of put it into practice. I really appreciate your perspective on that. It's something to look up to. Similarly to that, when you think about, your day to day now, you've been at this quite a while, and when you look at best practices and things you've learned from the people that you just talked about, is there a routine, maybe a repetition that you found that gives you the best traction and results? I'm sure it's a case by case or a matter by matter instant, but are there bigger principles perhaps maybe that you just have found work well for you and give you great traction?
If there was an opportunity for a routine in my practice, I think my practice would be a lot easier. I find myself every day, continuously trying to figure out what the right answers are, and usually the right answers are, presented by questions in a whole host of different areas. So even though I would say my practice is primarily comprised of insurance coverage matters, I still find myself on a daily basis, being confronted with all kinds of different product lines, different types of carriers, different jurisdictions. So, there's always a new and interesting question. As far as best practices go, again, it's all about precision. It's about making sure that you understand the question that's being asked. Never be afraid to ask a question. Always, dig in. Never settle for less, than you possibly can. There's the right answer, and then there's a good enough answer. And I don't ever want to be in the position where I'm settling for good enough when the right answer is attainable. So again, put in that extra effort, as a professional, to try to get to all the right answers that you can. At the end of the day, remember that, you are providing guidance to your clients, and you're trying your very best, to give the best guidance you can. And in doing so, try to put yourself in their shoes and think about the pressures and the external forces that they're dealing with when giving your advice, so that your advice is as helpful to them as possible. And I guess the final thing I would mention as far as a best practice is be responsive. Again, it's not important. It's not that you give an answer, in the first 30 seconds of receiving an inquiry, an email, a phone call, but it's important that you be as responsive as you can, noting the time constraints for which the client has asked you the question. So, again, it's most important that you give the client the right answer, but it's also important that you give the client the right answer in as timely a way as possible.
Sure. I'm imagining that clients can get anxious and wonder where you are on something, and I can certainly appreciate that. I'd like to shift gears just a little bit here. One of the things we haven't talked about yet in your impressive background, I didn't highlight it in your introduction, but Jonathan is a regular host for our listeners of Goldberg Segalla's Timely Notice podcast, and also a prolific speaker and writer on recent developments affecting the insurance industry. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you became involved in those two endeavors?
Sure, absolutely, David. I think that the writing aspect is something that I have been doing ever since law school, actually. Even in law school, I entered some writing competitions because I had ideas that I wanted to pursue. And I think it's important for the purpose of legal scholarship to get them on paper. So, ever since I was in law school, even as a young associate, I was publishing regularly. I always found it to be very important to develop, your legal acumen by studying areas that you might not be familiar with. And if you ever want to be, thought of as, as a thought leader in this space, you have to fulfill your end of the bargain, by providing the thought leadership. So that's something I've always found to be very important. And I'm very thankful that I'm at a firm that supports thought leadership as Goldberg Segalla does. Speaking has always been something I've always been interested in as well. When I was in high school and college, one of my primary activities was policy debates. So I always found myself on my feet, speaking, researching, and otherwise, arguing interesting points. So I found it a natural extension of my of the skills that I developed through policy debate and whatnot to enter the legal profession, and then from there take the thought leadership that I developed and turn it into scholarship that I could not only pass on through the written word, but also by presenting at conferences and trade organizations and other opportunities to speak to people who might not be able to read the pieces that I provide. And then the question about the podcast is a really interesting one, David. I've been interested in podcasts for many years. I subscribe to probably too many podcasts, listening to a podcast or another that always interests me. And I found that a few years ago, as I was thinking about what I could do to continue to further my legal scholarship, I realized there really wasn't a podcast out there for the the insurance industry with respect to claims and claim trends and other things relating to what I do. And so I approached my firm and said, I really think this would be a good idea to try to put out this podcast. And they were supportive, and I'm very thankful for that. So, we started from the ground up, coming up with ideas, reaching out to everybody in my network who would listen and asking them if they would come on the podcast. My partners have been, very accessible and willing to throw their hat in the ring and speak to me about an area that they're interested or that they're an expert in. And I found that throughout the entire experience, and I think we published well over 100 episodes. We're very proud of what we've created, and it's a great opportunity to provide yet another way that people can consume the content. There are a lot of people who write newsletters, and they're terrific, and I read a lot of them. There are people who write for Law 360, people who write for trade publications and trade magazines. But again, the one area I didn't find a lot of opportunity for content consumption was podcasts. I know that I'm always listening to them, and I'm on the go. People are traveling, or at least they were before the pandemic. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to give them a way they consume some interesting trends and hot topics by doing so, whether in the car, the train, or on the plane.
Yeah, and that's awesome. I listen to many podcasts myself, and I do those in the same situations where you just explained, whether it's in a car or on a run or something like that. So it's such a great additional area of resource for us, and we appreciate you doing that. When you think about young people that are in law school, or maybe young people that personally that come up and ask you, I'm considering being an attorney, or I'm a little bit into law school here, and I want to be an attorney like you had done at such a young age yourself. What's the best piece of advice that you would give to someone making that consideration? So
my advice is really as follows. The legal profession, especially private practice, it's hard. It's not an easy profession. I would say there are a lot easier ways to make a buck. But for those of us who really love the legal profession as much as we do, there are a few things that kind of run through us that make us a special breed. And I guess the question that I would ask either a new law student or someone who's considering, applying to law school, what is it about the legal profession that really interests you? What is it about, the practice of law that makes you think that would be a good fit for you? Why do you really want to be a lawyer? It's those kind of introspective questions that I think are very important. And, you would be surprised how many times you get the answer. I'm not really sure why, but, my philosophy degree, I didn't think was going to pay the bills. Or you might hear something like, my parents are lawyers, and I think I should do that too. And those are reasons to go to law school, but those are probably not the best reasons, because you find a lot of people that I went to law school with are not either using their legal degree these days, or have used a legal degree but are doing so in a completely different area. So I think that's great, and certainly law school is not intended to make a private practitioner out of everybody, and it's certainly not what we're looking for. I know that there's a lot of different ways you can use your law degree, but at the same time, law school is expensive for the most part, and again, I had a great time in law school, but at the same time, it's a difficult 3 years. So with that said, I think it's one of those gut check moments. Is this really what I want to do before jumping in? Because once you do, there's a lot of different attractions in the law practice that, again, you want to make sure that you're in it for the right reasons.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I hear you loud and clear on the challenges that someone would have going into that profession. And I think that's very wise advice. And, I think this has been a wonderful time that we've had today, Jonathan. It's been insightful. I hear passion in your voice as well. And that's awesome to hear that. I thank you for being a guest on our show today. It's been our pleasure to do that. Is there anything else that you want to add or say anything that before we wrap up? It's been a pleasure.
No, David, I thank you. I thank you very much for the opportunity to come on and tell a little bit about my story. It kind of feels a little bit like, this is your life, and going back and, talking about some of the things that led me to where I am today. And I'm very proud of where my career path has taken me. So again, I really appreciate the opportunity to share that with your listeners, especially those who, are considering, the path of insurance, the practice of insurance coverage, those who are thinking about going to law school, and especially those who have been in it and are looking for inspiration for how can I develop some thought leadership in the space. Maybe listening to this will energize them to publish, speak, or otherwise maybe develop their own podcast. So again, it's been a great opportunity, David, to speak with you. I really thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's our pleasure. And thanks again, Jonathan.
Thanks for listening to Engaging Experts. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss our future episodes.